Have you ever noticed how, even when everything is seemingly silent around you, there is a constant noise inside your mind that never stops? That feeling of restlessness that arises without warning, that takes away your sleep, that makes you relive problems, imagine scenarios, and carry a weight that no one sees, but that you feel all the time. And the more you try to calm down, the more it feels like something inside you insists on not resting. It's as if time slows down in these moments. Thoughts repeat themselves, spin in circles, and each memory, each concern gains a greater intensity than it should. The heart tightens, the breath changes, and peace seems something distant, almost impossible to achieve. And the hardest thing is not what's going on outside, it's what's going on inside you. But what if I told you that there is something hidden in plain sight, something simple yet profoundly powerful, that can interrupt this silent cycle inside your mind? Something that does not depend on circumstances, nor on external changes, but that acts directly at the root of this inner conflict. A path that was taught a long time ago, but that few really understood. There is a way to reorganize your thoughts, to silence this restlessness and experience a peace that cannot be explained. You just live. It is not a modern technique, nor a passing idea. It is a spiritual code revealed by Jesus that transforms not only what you feel, but who you become on the inside. And perhaps the most surprising thing is this key has never been far away. It has always been accessible, but hidden in the simplicity of words that many have heard and few actually did. Today, something different will happen. It is not just another reflection, nor another content to listen to and forget. There's a revelation here that could change the way your mind works, even today. And if you stick around to the end, you'll not only understand, you will feel it. John 14:27. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give it to you as the world gives. Let not your heart be troubled, neither let it be afraid. In the next few minutes, you will begin to notice something different happening inside you. Each word is built to touch deep areas of your mind and spirit, revealing Jesus' teachings that go beyond what is usually explained. Here you will understand how to master thoughts, recognize God's voice, heal hidden emotions, and develop a peace that does not depend on circumstances. As we move forward, it may seem that these truths are speaking directly to your story, as if God is reaching exactly the point you need most. And there is something important in all this. You did not get here by chance. There is a greater purpose connecting you to this message now. So while you continue, enjoy this moment and leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell, because this allows this message to reach other people who also need this peace. Romans 12:2. And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And this is exactly where something really begins to change, because there is a silent but powerful difference between listening to any thought that arises, and learning to recognize when it is God who is speaking within you. Most people have never been taught to make this distinction, and so they live hostage to a noisy mind, full of voices that confuse, pressure, and tire. But Jesus never taught a life of confusion. It pointed to clarity, direction, and peace. When you look at Samuel's story, you realize that he also didn't immediately understand what was going on. He heard a voice, but he couldn't identify where it came from. He would get up, go to Eli, try to find meaning, until at a specific moment something changed. He was instructed to respond differently. He didn't need to run. He didn't need to try to control. He just needed to stand up and say, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." And this detail changes everything, because mental chaos often comes not from a lack of answers, but from a lack of direction. It's when you don't know who to trust within yourself. That's when fear speaks loudly, anxiety masquerades as legitimate worry, and you start following thoughts that seem true but aren't. And the more you follow these wrong voices, the farther away from peace you feel. Jesus taught that there is a voice that calms, that organizes, that brings light. And this voice does not scream, does not pressure, does not generate despair. She drives. It directs. It brings a silent certainty that does not depend on explanation. But to hear that voice, something has to happen inside you. You have to learn to stop reacting to everything and start discerning. This is the point where the mind begins to be reconfigured. When you realize that not every thought deserves attention. When you understand that there is a difference between what you feel and what God is saying. And little by little, what was once confusion begins to align. The noise decreases, the internal urgency loses strength, and a new order begins to be established. It's not about never having negative thoughts again. It's about no longer being ruled by them. It's about developing spiritual sensitivity to recognize when God is calling you to a place of peace, even if everything around you seems unstable. And this call does not come with weight. It comes with direction. Perhaps, as you listen to this, something inside you is being played differently, as if this message is finding an exact place within your mind that needs adjustment. And if this is happening, don't ignore it. Sometimes it's in this kind of moment that everything starts to change. If this message spoke to you in a special way, write in the comments, "Speak, Lord, I want to listen." It may sound simple, but that's how many true beginnings happen. 1 Samuel 3:10, "Speak, Lord, for your servant hears." There is something even deeper that needs to be understood, because it is not only the confusion of the mind that steals peace. They are the wounds that have been opened throughout life, wounds that no one has seen, words that have marked, situations that you have not been able to resolve, and that even with the passing of the years continue to echo within you. And the problem is that these marks don't just stay in the memory. They shape how you think, how you react, and even how you see yourself. Many people try to move on ignoring these pains, as if time is enough to heal everything. But in practice, what happens is different. The mind continues to carry these memories silently, and at unexpected moments they come back with force, generating anxiety, fear, and even a feeling of lack of control. It's as if something inside you is still stuck. This is exactly what happened to this man who lived in the region of the Gadarenes. The Bible describes someone completely overwhelmed by an internal disorder. He had no peace, no control, no rest. His mind was a place of constant torment, and the most impressive thing is that no one was able to help him until Jesus appeared. Jesus did not begin with lengthy explanations or complicated processes. He brought direct, deep, and definitive deliverance. And that man, who had previously lived isolated, disturbed, and lost within his own mind, was later found in a completely different condition, calm, aware, and at peace. This reveals a powerful principle that often goes unnoticed. When Jesus touches the root, the entire mind is reorganized. God's word works as a precise instrument, capable of reaching places within you that no one else can. It doesn't just treat symptoms, it goes straight to the origin. Distorted thoughts begin to be corrected, wounded emotions begin to be restored, and what seemed impossible to change begins to give way. And maybe you're realizing now that your restlessness isn't just tiredness or worry. Perhaps there is something deeper in demand for healing, something that needs to be addressed, not ignored. Because true peace doesn't begin when everything is fine around. It begins when what is wounded within you finds restoration. And when that happens, something changes quietly, but definitively. The mind slows down, the weight decreases, and you begin to experience a lightness that once seemed distant. Not because the problems have disappeared, but because what held you inside has lost its strength. If this word is reaching exactly a sensitive place within you, don't ignore it. It can be the beginning of a healing that you have needed for a long time. If it makes sense to you, write in the comments, "Jesus, heal my mind," and leave your like on this video because it can take that same message to other people who also need that liberation. Luke 8:35. And they found the man from whom the demons had come out, clothed and in his right mind, sitting at the feet of Jesus. There is an even deeper point in this journey, because after the mind begins to heal, it needs to learn to stay in a different place. It's not enough just to be restored. It is necessary to sustain this peace. And this is where many people get lost, because they continue to live at an accelerated internal pace, as if they need to be always reacting, thinking, solving, anticipating. The mind doesn't stop, and for this reason, peace does not remain. Elijah reached such an extreme moment. After big wins, he found himself drained, scared, confused, and emotionally overwhelmed. He wasn't just physically tired. His mind was collapsing, and in that state, he hoped to meet God in an impactful, strong, evident way. But what happened was completely different from what he imagined. The Bible says that a strong wind came, then an earthquake, then fire. Intense demonstrations which would draw anyone's attention. But God was not in any of these movements, and this reveals something profound. Not everything that is noisy carries the presence of God. Not everything that seems urgent comes from God. Often what agitates your mind the most is not direction, it's distraction. Then, after all this, something almost imperceptible happened, a gentle breeze, a soft, delicate voice, and it was there that God manifested himself, not in chaos, but in silence. Jesus carried exactly this awareness. Even in the midst of crowds, pressures, and constant demands, he always found moments to withdraw, to be silent, to reconnect. Because he knew that an agitated mind loses spiritual sensitivity. And when you lose that sensitivity, you start living on automatic, reacting to life, instead of being guided by God. Maybe what you are missing is not more effort, nor more answers. Maybe it's silence, but not just an external silence, an inner silence. A place where thoughts slow down, where anxiety loses strength, and where you start to notice something that has always been there, the presence of God. And this kind of silence does not happen by chance. He is a choice. That's when you decide not to feed every thought that arises. That's when you learn to pause, to breathe, not to get carried away by everything you feel. And little by little, something begins to change. The mind becomes lighter, the heart calms down, and that feeling of constant heaviness begins to fade, because it is in this place that peace is truly established, not as a passing moment, but as a state that is born of presence. And maybe now, as you listen to this, you're realizing how much you need that silence within you, not as an escape, but as a meeting. If this desire is arising in your heart, write in the comments a simple but meaningful phrase, "God, I want to hear you in silence." Sometimes a decision like this, expressed even in a few words, makes room for something much bigger to start within you. 1 Kings 19:12. And after the fire, a still, small voice. There is a moment in the journey when silence begins to reveal something even more challenging, the need to trust, even when nothing seems to make sense. Because by now you have begun to perceive the voice of God. You have begun to feel healing happening. You have begun to experience small moments of peace. But what about when the reality around you remains the same? And when circumstances don't change at the speed you expected? This is exactly where faith comes in, but not as many people imagine. Jesus never treated faith as a simple belief or a positive thought. He taught faith as a new way of looking at reality, a different lens that completely changes the way you interpret what you are experiencing. And Pedro lived it intensely. That scenario was not favorable. The wind was strong, the sea rough, the fear present. Everything around pointed to danger, to impossibility, to retreat. But in the midst of that chaos, there was a voice. And that voice did not deny reality. It presented a greater reality. When Jesus said, "Come," he wasn't just calling Peter out of the boat. He was inviting Peter to come out of a limited mindset. And for a few moments, Pedro succeeded. He walked on water. This means that as long as his eyes were aligned with the voice of Jesus, the reality around him lost the power to overwhelm him. His mind was reconfigured in that instant. The fear has not disappeared, but he stopped governing. The problem started when he changed his focus, when he looked back at the wind, at the waves, at everything that had always been there. And at that moment, his mind went back to the old pattern. Fear took control again, and he began to sink. This reveals something that completely transforms the way you face your own life. Peace does not come from the absence of problems, but from the way you choose to see what is in front of you. Faith doesn't just change what happens outside, it changes what happens inside. How many times have you felt this way? Knowing what God said, but at the same time being pulled by what you see, by what you feel, by what seems most real at that moment. This internal conflict is exactly the field where faith needs to be activated. Because trusting in God is not ignoring reality. It is to recognize that there is a truth greater than what your eyes are showing. It is consciously choosing to align your mind with God's voice, even when everything around you insists on saying otherwise. And when that choice starts to become constant, something changes profoundly. Anxiety loses space. Fear weakens, and a different peace begins to emerge, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer being dominated by what once paralyzed you. If you've made it this far, there's a reason. Maybe God is working exactly in the way you see your life right now, and at the end of this video, there is a moment prepared for you to connect even more deeply with that peace. Stay with me until the end, because what comes next can strengthen your faith in a way you haven't experienced yet. Matthew 14:29. And Peter got down from the boat and walked on the water to come to Jesus. And as your mind begins to be trained to trust, another silent challenge appears, perhaps even more difficult to face, because it is not outside. It has been stored inside you for a long time. These are memories that still hurt, situations that have not been resolved, words that have been marked, and even if you try to move on, there's something that pulls your mind back, as if a part of you is still stuck in that moment. The problem is that the hurt does not stand still. It takes up space. It seeps into your thoughts, alters how you interpret everything, and creates a constant cycle of restlessness. You may not even realize it on a daily basis, but it is there, influencing your emotions, stealing your lightness, and preventing peace from being completely established. That is why Jesus was so direct when he spoke about forgiveness. He didn't treat it as a suggestion. He revealed it as a necessity. When Peter asked how many times he should forgive, perhaps expecting a reasonable number, Jesus answered something that breaks any human logic: 70 times 7. It wasn't about math. It was about a mindset. It was about living in a continuous state of liberation, because forgiveness is not about the other. It's about what's going on inside you. When you don't forgive, you keep reliving the pain. You keep getting stuck in that situation. You keep allowing something from the past to rule your present. The mind is overloaded, divided, in constant conflict. But when you decide to forgive, something starts to break. It doesn't mean that it was easy, nor that what happened was right. It means that you chose not to carry it anymore. It means that you are freeing up space within your mind for something new to happen. And here's a detail that transforms everything. Forgiveness is not a feeling, it is a decision. Many people expect to feel like forgiving, but that moment almost never comes. Jesus taught the opposite. You decide, and then, little by little, your inner self begins to follow that decision. And it is in this process that the mind begins to be reconfigured in a profound way. What used to generate pain begins to lose strength. Memories no longer have the same weight, and without realizing it, you begin to experience a lightness that you haven't felt in a long time. Maybe there's something you haven't fully released yet, something that every time it comes to your mind, takes away your peace, changes your mood, weighs down your heart. And maybe today is the time to start this process, not out of obligation, but because you deserve to live free of it. If this message touched exactly that point within you, turn it into a simple but powerful act. Write in the comments, "Lord, I choose to forgive." Make it a real step, even if it's a small one. And leave your like on this video, because this decision can reach other people who also need this liberation. Matthew 18:22. I do not say unto you that up to 7, but up to 70 times 7. And there is an even deeper layer to this transformation of the mind, something that often goes unnoticed, but that underpins everything you think, feel, and experience every day, the way you see yourself. Because in the end, it's not just thoughts that shape your peace. It is the identity that you carry within you. Many concerns begin precisely here. When you're not clear about who you are, the mind tries to fill that void with outside opinions, comparisons, memories of the past, and even mistakes that should have been left behind by now. And without realizing it, you begin to live based on distorted versions of yourself. This generates insecurity, constant doubt, and a feeling of never being enough. But when Jesus was baptized, something extraordinary happened before any miracle, before any public teaching, before any manifestation of power. A voice came from heaven and declared, "This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased." That wasn't just a statement. It was a foundation. It was the revelation that identity comes before action. And that changes everything, because Jesus didn't need to prove who he was. He already knew, and this inner certainty is what sustained his peace, even in the face of rejection, criticism, and extreme challenges. The mind that knows its identity is not easily lost. She is not shaken by any opinion. She is not confused with any situation. Now think sincerely. How many times has your peace been stolen, not by what happened, but by what you thought about yourself after that? A misplaced word, a difficult situation, a failure. And suddenly, your mind starts to build a narrative that diminishes you, that weakens you, that distances you from who you really are. That's exactly where this reconfiguration needs to happen. When you begin to align your mind with what God says about you, something begins to change internally. It's not pride, it's not illusion, it is spiritual positioning. It is understanding that your identity is not in what you have done or what they have done to you, but in what God has declared. And this truth begins to reorganize everything. Insecurity loses strength. The need for approval decreases. Anxiety weakens, because now you're no longer trying to find yourself, you are living from who you already are in God. And the more this truth is strengthened within you, the more peace becomes constant. Not because everything is perfect, but because you no longer depend on circumstances to feel whole. Perhaps this is the missing key for many things to start making sense within you. And if that message has found a special place in your heart, don't ignore it. When you like, subscribe, and activate the bell, you allow that same truth to reach other people who also need to rediscover their identity in God. Be a part of it. Matthew 3:17. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. And when identity begins to take hold within you, an essential need arises to protect all that is being built, spiritual discernment. Because it's not enough to know who you are. You need to know how to correctly interpret what is happening around you. Often what steals peace is not the situation itself, but the way it is perceived by the mind. Jesus had an impressive ability to see beyond words, beyond attitudes, and beyond appearances. He did not react impulsively, did not let himself be carried away by momentary emotions, and was not manipulated by external opinions. The Bible says that he knew what was in people's hearts. This means that he operated at a level of perception that went far beyond the natural. And that's exactly what many minds lack today. The absence of discernment makes any situation gain an exaggerated weight. A comment becomes a deep offense. A silence turns into rejection. A delay turns into despair. And without realizing it, the mind begins to create interpretations that do not correspond to the truth, but that generate anxiety, insecurity, and internal conflict. An undiscerning mind is vulnerable. She reacts instead of understanding. She rushes instead of observing. And this makes room for distorted thoughts that silently but constantly take away peace. But when spiritual discernment begins to be developed, something changes profoundly. You start to look at situations more clearly. Not everything shakes you like it used to. Not everything deserves your energy. Not everything has the meaning it seemed to have at first. There is a pause between what happens and how you respond. And that pause is powerful, because it is in it that you stop being dominated by emotions and start to be guided by the truth. It is there that you can perceive when something comes from God and when it doesn't. It is in it that your mind finds balance, even in the face of situations that previously completely disorganized you. Developing this type of sensitivity does not happen automatically. It's a process. That's when you start to pay more attention, to seek God's presence more, to better filter what enters your mind. And little by little, you realize that what once confused you no longer has the same effect. Maybe you're living situations today that seem difficult to understand. People, decisions, paths, all mixed inside your mind. But it may be that what you need is not more information, but discernment. A deeper look. A perception more aligned with God. And if that word reminded you of someone who also needs that clarity, someone who is facing confusion, anxiety, or difficult decisions, don't keep it to yourself. Write that person's name in the comments. Let's form a chain of prayer, presenting each name before God, believing that He can bring direction, peace, and understanding. Sometimes, a simple gesture like this becomes the beginning of something powerful. John 2:25. And he did not need anyone to testify of the man, because he well knew what was in the man. And when discernment begins to protect your mind, you begin to realize something even deeper that was behind many of your concerns. The difficulty of trusting completely. Because deep down, a lot of the anxiety doesn't just come from what's happening, but the need to control what has not yet happened. Jesus touched on exactly this point when he spoke about the lilies of the field. He wasn't just describing nature. He was revealing a spiritual principle that directly confronts the way the human mind works. He said to observe how the lilies grow, how they exist, how they bloom, without effort, without anxiety, without trying to control it. And this may seem simple at first glance, but it carries a truth that transforms everything. Because while the entire creation naturally responds to God's provision, human beings often live disconnected from this trust. The mind begins to project scenarios, anticipate problems, imagine shortages, and without realizing it, enters a constant cycle of worry. Anxiety, in this sense, is not just overthinking. It's a sign that at some level confidence is weakened. It is as if, deep down, there is a silent doubt. Will God really take care of it? Will everything work out? And this doubt manifests itself in the form of tension, restlessness, and mental fatigue. But Jesus invites us to reposition. He does not say to ignore life, nor to be passive in the face of responsibilities. It points to something deeper, actively trusting. This means doing what needs to be done, but without carrying the weight of trying to control what is beyond your hands. When this confidence begins to be developed, something changes within you. The mind slows down. The need to have all the answers decreases. The heart finds a kind of rest that does not depend on visible assurances, and little by little you begin to live with a lightness that previously seemed impossible. Because trusting in God is not the absence of action. It is the absence of despair. It is knowing that even without understanding all the details, there is constant care supporting each step. It is looking at life with a different perspective, where fear of the future loses strength and peace begins to occupy space. Maybe you're right at that point today, overthinking, trying to solve everything at the same time, carrying a weight that was not made for you to carry. And without realizing it, your mind is already tired even before things happen. But there is an invitation being made here, an invitation to let go, to trust, to rest, not because everything is solved, but because God remains in control, even when you don't see it. And if you've made it this far, that's no coincidence. There is something being aligned within you, step by step. Nothing happens by chance. This message may be just the answer you've been quietly looking for. Continue to the end, because there is still something very special prepared to speak directly to your heart. Matthew 6:28. Look at the lilies of the field, how they grow. They do not work or spin. And after understanding all this, a truth emerges that many ignore, but that defines whether this transformation will remain or disappear over time. The mind does not change all at once. It is renewed every day. There is a very big difference between having a moment of peace and living in peace. Many people have felt relief, they have had profound experiences, but they have returned to the same patterns because they did not sustain the process. The Apostle Paul understood this clearly. He faced constant pressures, intense challenges, situations that would naturally shake anyone. Still, he declared something that seems simple but carries immense power. The interior is renewed day by day. This means that regardless of what happened around him, there was a continuous movement happening within him. Jesus also taught this in a practical way when he said that each day has its own care. He was showing that the mind was not made to carry the weight of yesterday along with the worries of tomorrow. When this happens, the result is an emotional build-up that turns into anxiety, tiredness, and discouragement. And this is exactly where many people get lost. They try to solve their whole lives at once. They try to have all the answers, control all the scenarios, anticipate everything that can go wrong. And, without realizing it, they overload their minds with a weight they should never carry. Daily renewal breaks this cycle. It brings the mind back to the present. It teaches you to deal with what is in front of you today, with the awareness that God is already in tomorrow. This is not passivity, it's alignment. It is to live with a constant confidence that each day will be sustained. But this renewal does not happen automatically. It is built. It is when you set aside moments to reconnect, to align your thoughts, to remember truths that need to be reinforced within you. That's when you decide not to start the day on automatic, but with intention. And also when he chooses not to end the day carrying everything that happened, but delivering. Over time, something begins to change in a profound way. Those old thoughts which once dominated your mind begin to lose ground. Impulsive reactions decrease. The way you see problems changes. And what used to destabilize you no longer has the same power. Because the transformation that Jesus proposes is not superficial. It's not just feeling something different for a few moments. It is an internal reconstruction where the mind is continuously adjusted, aligned, and strengthened. It's a quiet but extremely powerful process, and the more you allow yourself to live this process, the more you realize that peace is not something distant or occasional. It begins to become a part of who you are. Not because life has become perfect, but because day after day your mind is being trained to stay in the right place. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Therefore we do not faint, but though our outward man be perished, yet the inward man is renewed day by day. And as this daily renewal begins to take place within you, something new becomes necessary, learning to trust God's direction, even when it doesn't come with all the answers you'd like. Because there is a natural tendency of the human mind to want to understand everything before taking a step. The need for control, security, guarantees. All of this seems to bring stability, but in fact, it often only adds to the internal confusion. Abraham faced just such a challenge. God gave a clear direction, but he did not give away all the details. He did not explain the complete path, did not reveal each stage, did not show the final destination in advance. I just said to go out, to trust, to walk. And this directly confronts the way the mind works, because the disorganized mind always seeks to control everything. It wants to predict, calculate, anticipate each possibility, and when he can't, he enters a state of restlessness. Thoughts multiply, doubts increase, and peace disappears. But the mind that begins to align with God learns something different. It rests at the wheel, even though it doesn't have the full map. Jesus taught just that. He did not call people to a life of absolute control, but to a walk of continuous trust. He showed that peace is not in knowing everything, but in knowing who you are trusting, and this change in perspective completely transforms the interior. When you begin to obey what God has already shown you, even if it seems small, something begins to adjust within you. The confusion subsides. The excess of thoughts loses strength, and that need to have all the answers is being replaced by a deeper, more stable certainty. It is as if, little by little, your mind is being reorganized. What once seemed urgent is no longer urgent. What used to generate anxiety begins to be seen more clearly, and you realize that you don't have to carry the weight of understanding everything, just to follow the next step in faith. And this does not mean the absence of doubts. Abraham probably had moments of questioning, of uncertainty, of waiting, but even so, he kept walking. And it is in this movement that peace is sustained, not in the absence of questions, but in the decision to continue trusting, even without all the answers. Maybe today you are exactly at that point, feeling that you need to decide something, follow a path, take action, but at the same time wanting to be sure of everything before acting. And this has generated a weight inside you, a confusion that seems to have no end. But there is an invitation being made here, an invitation to trust in the direction that God has already begun to show you, even if it is not complete. Even if there are still parts that you don't understand, because it is in this kind of trust that the mind finds real rest. And if this word came to you in a special way, maybe it's no coincidence. God has unique ways of reaching the heart, even in the simplest details. If this touched your soul, write in the comments, "I trust God." Sometimes a decision expressed like this becomes the first step towards real change. Genesis 12:1. Now the Lord said to Abram, "Get out of your country, from your relatives, and from your father's house, to the land that I will show you." And when you begin to trust the direction, even without seeing the full path, an even deeper need arises. To have an inner place where your mind can remain steadfast, regardless of what is happening around you. Because trusting in steps still requires something to sustain those steps. And it is exactly here that God's presence becomes essential. Moses lived under constant pressure. He dealt with an unstable people, frequent complaints, difficult decisions, and responsibilities that surpassed any human capacity. Naturally, this would be enough to completely destabilize anyone's mind. But there was something different about him. The peace he carried did not come from the absence of problems. It came from a specific place where he met God. At a decisive moment, Moises made it clear that he did not want to move forward without this presence. For him, it was not enough to have direction. It was not enough to have promises. If God were not present, nothing made sense. And the answer he received reveals a powerful principle. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. It wasn't just company. It was emotional, mental, and spiritual sustenance. Jesus lived exactly that way. In the midst of crowds, constant demands, and intense situations, he always found time to withdraw. It was not an escape. It was alignment. He knew that without this return to the Father's presence, the mind could wear out. And this detail reveals something that many people ignore. It is not the volume of problems that defines your inner state. It is how connected you are with God's presence while facing these problems. The human mind seeks stability in circumstances. He wants everything to be organized, resolved, predictable. But life rarely works like that. And when this expectation is not met, the mind gets agitated, gets lost, overloaded. That is why so many people live in constant emotional oscillation. But when you begin to develop an ongoing awareness of God's presence, something changes in a profound way. It's no longer about having isolated moments of peace. It's about carrying that presence into your daily life. It's realizing that, even in the midst of challenges, you're not alone. That there is an invisible but real support. And that awareness begins to act as an anchor. When thoughts try to lead you to anxiety, you return. When external situations try to shake you, you reposition yourself, not because everything is under control, but because you know where you are grounded. This practice does not require perfection, it requires intention. Small moments throughout the day, small internal pauses, small reminders that God is present. And, little by little, this is no longer something you do, and it becomes something you live. If you're here so far, it's no accident. There is something being built inside of you, step by step, layer by layer. And what comes next can further deepen that connection and strengthen your mind in a way you may never have experienced. Stay until the end, because this journey still holds something very special for you. Exodus 33:14. My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest. And when this presence begins to become constant within you, something essential begins to take shape. The realization that your life is not happening by chance. Because one of the biggest causes of mental confusion is the feeling of not knowing where you are going, of not understanding the why of things, of feeling that everything is disconnected. And this generates anxiety, restlessness, and even discouragement. Joseph lived exactly the opposite of this, even going through situations that, to human eyes, made no sense at all. He was rejected by his own brothers, sold, wronged, forgotten in prison. Every stage of his life could have been a reason for revolt, for confusion, for completely losing peace. But there was something that sustained his mind. He knew deep inside that there was a greater purpose being built, and that changes everything. Because when you don't have clarity of purpose, any difficulty seems like the end. Any delay feels like a loss. Any closed door seems like definitive rejection. The mind begins to interpret everything negatively, creating a cycle of thoughts that feeds anxiety and insecurity. But when there is an alignment with God's purpose, the way you see situations changes completely. That doesn't mean you understand everything all the time. Joseph didn't understand either, but he trusted that even in difficult moments, something was being prepared. Jesus taught this same view. He showed that life is not a random sequence of events, but a journey led by God, where even the most difficult moments can be used for something greater. And when that truth enters the mind, it begins to rearrange everything. Pain does not disappear, but loses its power to destroy. The wait continues, but it is no longer desperate. Difficult situations still exist, but they no longer generate the same kind of internal confusion. Because now there's a silent certainty underpinning it all. God is at work, even when you don't see it. And this certainty brings peace, a different, deeper peace, which does not depend on immediate answers. It is the peace of knowing that your story is being conducted, that every detail has a purpose, that nothing is out of God's control. Maybe today you are experiencing something that does not make sense, something that you didn't plan, that you don't understand, that even seems unfair. And this has generated questions inside his mind. But what if, as in Joseph's life, this is not the end of the story, but part of something bigger that's still being built? And if this word touched your heart in any way, recognizing that God has been present in your life even in difficult times, write in the comments, Amen. Sometimes a simple statement like this strengthens something within you and also reaches out to others who need to remember that God is still good. Genesis 50:20. You meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. And even when you begin to realize this greater purpose acting in your life, there are still times when pain speaks louder. Because understanding does not prevent you from feeling. Knowing that God is in control doesn't mean that the heart won't break at certain times. And this is exactly where many get confused, thinking they need to hide their pain to keep the faith. David never did that. He was a man after God's own heart, but he was also someone who wept, who anguished, who expressed his pain openly. In the Psalms, he did not filter his feelings. He talked about fear, loneliness, deep sadness. But there is a powerful detail in all this. He never stopped in pain. He took the pain to God. And that changes everything, because there is a difference between carrying suffering alone and putting that suffering into God's hands. When pain gets stuck inside the mind, it turns into constant weight. It begins to fragment thoughts, to steal energy, to generate a tiredness that does not go away. But when this pain is delivered, something begins to reorganize itself internally. Jesus demonstrated this vividly. He did not ignore the afflicted. He did not rush processes. He did not diminish people's pain. He welcomed. He was approaching. He brought a presence that often healed even before any words were spoken. Because true peace is not born from the absence of pain. It is born from the consolation you receive in the midst of it. And this consolation is not only emotional, it is spiritual. It is something that reaches a place deep within you where no one else can reach. That's when you realize that you're not alone in what you're feeling, that God is not distant, indifferent, or alien. He is near, especially at times when the heart is most broken. Maybe you've learned to be strong all along, not to demonstrate, not to speak, to keep, but this comes at a price. The mind is overloaded, the soul is getting tired, and peace is becoming more and more distant. And if what you really need now isn't more strength, but consolation. Delivering is not weakness. Crying is not a sign of defeat. Opening your heart before God is the beginning of a real restoration, because when you allow Him to come right into that wounded place, He begins to rebuild what was broken, not superficially, but profound, true. And little by little, what seemed impossible to bear begins to lose weight. The mind calms down, the heart finds rest, and a different peace begins to emerge, not because the pain has completely disappeared, but because it is no longer being carried alone. If this word has found a place within you, perhaps it is because God is wanting to touch exactly that area of your life. Don't leave now. Stay until the end, because what is yet to be revealed can complete something important within you. Sometimes this is the process where true restoration begins. Psalm 34:18. The Lord is near to those who are broken in heart and saves the contrite in spirit. And even after experiencing comfort, direction, and purpose, there are still times when the mind oscillates between faith and doubt, not because the person doesn't believe, but because, at certain points of the journey, insecurity tries to return. It is as if inside that silent question arises, is it really God speaking to me? Gideon experienced exactly this type of conflict. He received a clear direction, a specific calling, but his mind was still struggling to keep up with it. He didn't see himself as someone capable, he didn't feel prepared, and insecurity tried to dominate his thoughts. Then he asked for a sign, and the most impressive thing is that God responded, but not to encourage doubt, but to strengthen Gideon's mind. This reveals something very important. God knows the inner process of each person. He understands when the mind needs confirmation to fully align, and in many moments he allows signs, answers, details that seem small, but that bring a profound clarity. Jesus also worked in this way. Many of the signs he performed were not just demonstrations of power. They were instruments to awaken faith, to reposition thoughts, to help people see beyond what they were seeing. Each miracle carried a message that went beyond the visible. But there is an important balance here. The signs were not meant to replace faith, but to strengthen it at specific times. When the mind depends exclusively on signs to believe, it becomes unstable. You will always need something new, constant confirmation, and this generates a silent restlessness. On the other hand, when a person learns to recognize the signs without depending on them, something changes profoundly. She realizes that God keeps speaking, keeps guiding, keeps manifesting, but their confidence is no longer tied to external evidence. It's rooted in something more solid. Maybe you've experienced moments like this. Situations in which something happened unexpectedly, an answer came at the right time, a detail fit precisely, and in that instant you felt it was no coincidence. It was God showing you that He was present. But over time the mind can try to rationalize everything, doubt, question, and that certainty begins to weaken. It is at this point that balance needs to be restored. Nor ignore the signs, nor depend entirely on them, but recognize God and allow them to strengthen their faith, because in the end, signs are like reminders, small adjustments that God uses to refocus your mind, to bring you back into alignment, to remind you that you are not walking alone. And when you start living with that awareness, the mind finds a new kind of stability, not based on constant evidence, but on a trust that has been built along the way, a confidence that grows, matures, and becomes firmer and firmer. Judges 6:17. If I have now found favor in your sight, give me a sign that it is you speaking to me. And as the mind is strengthened, healed, and aligned, there is a point that cannot be ignored, because many end up failing exactly here, the attempt to walk alone. There is a silent idea that settles in some people, as if the spiritual journey were something individual, isolated, as if it were possible to sustain peace only with one's own effort. But that's not the way Jesus taught. From the beginning, He formed a group. He brought people together, built relationships, shared moments, and this was not by chance. He was showing that the spiritual walk was not meant to be solitary. There is a force that only manifests itself when there is communion. The early church understood this deeply. Even in the midst of persecution, pressure, and hardship, they remained together. They shared the faith, prayed for one another, shared their burdens. And this strengthened not only the spirit, but also the mind. Because when you're surrounded by people walking in the same direction, something inside you stabilizes. Now, the opposite is also true. An isolated mind becomes vulnerable. When you face everything alone, thoughts gain more strength, doubts grow without confrontation, emotions become unbalanced. And without realizing it, what could be light begins to become too heavy. How many times have you tried to solve everything yourself, to keep what you are feeling, to deal with your own battles in silence without dividing, without opening up? At first, it seems easier, but over time, this wears off. The mind becomes overloaded, the heart closes, and peace begins to recede. But when there is true communion, something changes. It's not about the number of people. It's about connection. It's about having someone to share with, to pray with, to walk with. It's about knowing that there are other people who are also seeking, struggling, growing, and this brings balance. Because in moments of weakness, someone strengthens you. In moments of doubt, someone reminds you of the truth. In moments of fatigue, someone walks by his side. And so the mind does not get lost, it does not overload, it does not get disorganized. Jesus never projected a solitary faith. He projected a faith lived together, where one sustains the other, where the presence of God is also manifested in the union. And when you understand this, you start to value something that may have been neglected before. Maybe this is an area that needs attention in your life. Maybe you've drifted away, isolated yourself, tried to carry everything yourself. But there is a different path. A path where peace is also sustained by communion. And if this message has made you realize how important this is, maybe it's time to take a simple but meaningful step. By interacting with this video, liking, subscribing, and activating the bell, you help this message reach others who also need that connection. And so together, more lives can be strengthened by this truth. Acts 2:42. And they continued steadfastly in the apostles' doctrine, and in fellowship, and in the breaking of bread, and in prayers. And even with everything that has been built so far, there is a state that can reach any mind at some point in the journey, deep discouragement. Not that fleeting tiredness, but that silent feeling of loss of meaning, of weakened hope, as if something inside you had gradually faded away. And the most dangerous thing about this state is that it doesn't come abruptly. It settles in slowly. This is exactly what happened to the disciples on the road to Emmaus. They had walked with Jesus, seen miracles, heard teachings, lived profound experiences. But in the face of events they didn't understand, their minds began to close. The hope that was once alive began to fade, and now they were walking, but without internal direction, without expectation, just following, as if no longer believing. And this is more common than it seems. Moments when something doesn't happen as expected, prayers that don't seem to be answered, situations that get out of control. And without realizing it, the mind begins to interpret everything negatively. The spiritual vision is weakened, and the heart loses that fire that once existed. But something extraordinary happens in this story. Jesus approaches, and they don't realize it. This reveals a profound detail. Even when hope seems distant, Christ's presence remains near. He begins to walk with them, to listen, to speak, and little by little, something begins to change inside them. The external situation had not changed. The path was still the same. But as Jesus spoke, as he revealed truths, something began to rekindle within them. A flame that seemed extinguished came back into existence. And then, when all was revealed, they said something that completely defines that moment. Did not our hearts burn within us? This shows that hope is not just wishful thinking. It is a spiritual experience. It is something that is born when the presence of Christ touches the mind and the heart at the same time. And when this happens, the way of seeing life changes completely. The discouragement begins to lose strength. That feeling of heaviness decreases. The vision opens up again. And what seemed to have no way out is beginning to be seen with new eyes. not because everything has been resolved, but because hope has returned. Maybe you're in a moment like that, walking, following, but without that flame that once existed. And maybe you didn't even realize when it started. But just as with those disciples, Jesus' presence is still near, even if you haven't recognized it yet. And as you keep listening, reflecting, something may be going on inside of you right now, a small change, a slight rekindling, a sign that hope has not died. She was just waiting to be awakened again. Luke 24:32. Did not our hearts burn within us when they spoke to us on the way? And when that hope begins to be rekindled within you, that's when a quieter battle unfolds. Because before any change happens on the outside, there is a confrontation going on inside your mind, a confrontation between what you know to be true and that which tries to divert you from this truth. Jesus faced just that in the wilderness. Before he began all that he would do publicly, before he taught multitudes and performed miracles, he was brought into a place of internal confrontation. And there, what was at stake was not just a momentary choice. It was the steadfastness of his mind. The temptations he faced were not only external, they were accompanied by suggestions, thoughts, distortions of the truth. It was as if, at every moment, something was trying to make him doubt, to give in, to choose an easier path. And that's exactly how it happens to anyone. The spiritual battle begins in the mind, because that's where thoughts arise that try to push you away, that try to weaken you, that try to make you negotiate what God has already made clear. And often, these suggestions don't seem wrong at first glance. They seem logical, justifiable, even necessary, but they carry a subtle detour. Jesus did not respond with emotion. He did not enter into a debate. He did not allow himself to be confused. He answered with truth. Each time something tried to distort the path, he took a firm stand, remembering what was already established. This shows that victory does not happen by chance. It's built on how you respond to thoughts. How many times has your mind been taken to places you knew weren't good? Thoughts of fear, doubt, giving up, guilt. And when you realize it, you're already involved. You're already feeling the weight of it all. This is because if there is no vigilance, the mind begins to accept that which it should reject. But when you learn to master this process, something changes completely. You begin to notice faster when a thought does not come from God. You stop feeding what weakens you, and little by little your mind becomes firmer, more stable, more protected. True victory doesn't start when things change around you. It starts when you decide not to surrender internally, when you choose to stand firm, even when it would be easier to give in, when you understand that every thought accepted or rejected is shaping your path. And this awareness changes everything, because now you're no longer fighting in the dark. You begin to recognize what needs to be faced and how to respond. And just like Jesus in the desert, you realize that strength does not come from you. It comes from the truth that you decide to hold. If this message is bringing clarity to something you've already been feeling, don't let it go unnoticed. Sometimes acknowledging this battle is already the first step to winning it. If this made sense to you, write in the comments, "God takes care of me." It may sound simple, but this statement strengthens something inside you that needs to stand firm. Matthew 4:10. The Lord your God you shall worship, and him only shall you serve. And once you understand that the real battle begins in the mind, there is an even deeper level where that mind is continuously and powerfully aligned. Intercession. Because the prayer that Jesus taught was not just a time to ask for things. It was a place of connection, of alignment, of internal transformation. Jesus prayed constantly. In many moments he withdrew from everything, not because he needed to flee, but because he knew that there was the source of everything. And there is something that many people have not yet realized. When you pray only for yourself, you already access something powerful. But when you intercede, something even deeper happens within you. To intercede is to leave the center. This is when your mind stops revolving only around your own problems, your own concerns, and begins to align with something bigger. And in this movement, something begins to change silently but intensely. Anxiety loses space, the weight decreases, the mind slows down, because you're no longer stuck with just what you feel. You are connected with what God is doing. Jesus, even though he was who he was, interceded. The Bible reveals that he lives to intercede. This means that there is an active, constant spiritual dimension where intercession is not an event, it's a lifestyle. And when you start accessing that, your mind starts to be elevated. Situations that once seemed too big are starting to be seen differently. Problems that occupied all his thoughts lose strength, and a different peace begins to emerge, not because everything has been resolved, but because you have been repositioned internally. Interceding does not only transform what is outside, it transforms you from the inside. How many times has your mind been stuck in repetitive worries, thinking about the same things, spinning on the same thoughts without finding a way out? This cycle is only broken when there is a change in focus, and intercession does just that. It takes you out of this closed place and into a space where God rules. And the more you practice this, the more you notice that your mind starts to work differently. Less agitated, more centered, more aligned. Not because you stopped having challenges, but because there is now a constant connection sustaining you. Maybe today you need to take that step, not just praying for answers, but to position themselves in intercession, to bring before God other people, other situations, other realities, and in the process allow your own mind to be adjusted, because there is a peace that is only experienced when you step out of yourself and enter this place of deep connection with God. If you've made it this far, pay attention to this. What you're going to hear next may be just the missing piece to complete all of this within you. There is something being prepared, something that can transform even more profoundly the way you think and live. Stay until the end, because this next step can make all the difference. Hebrews 7:25. Therefore, he is able to save to the uttermost those who come to God through him, always living to make intercession for them. And after understanding the power of intercession, something comes along that completely changes the rhythm of your life, the perception of God's timing. Because it's not enough just to know what to do. It is necessary to discern when to do it, and it is exactly here that many minds get confused, delayed, or rushed. Jonas was given clear direction. There was no doubt about what God wanted, but even so, he tried to flee. And the most interesting thing is that the problem was not only external disobedience. That's what started to happen inside him. When one resists God's timing, the mind is in conflict. Restlessness, heaviness, discomfort arise. It's as if something is constantly out of place. This happens because there is a spiritual alignment that needs to be respected. There are moments to act, moments to wait, moments to speak, and moments to be silent. And when the person loses this sensitivity, he begins to live outside the right time, and this generates internal confusion. Jesus lived with this awareness perfectly. He knew when to respond and when to remain silent. He knew when to move forward and when to retreat. On several occasions, even though he was pressed, he did not move ahead of time. And at other times, he acted with precision, without hesitation. This reveals a mind that is completely aligned with spiritual time. And here's something that can completely change the way you live. Not every restlessness you feel comes from external problems. It is often the reflection of a misalignment with God's time. That's when you know, deep down, that you should have done something and didn't, or when you try to force something that is not yet the time. Spiritual procrastination is one of the biggest causes of this internal conflict. It's not just postponing tasks. It is to postpone decisions that God has already shown. It is to ignore clear directions. It is to run away from something that needs to be faced. And this accumulates inside the mind, generating weight, anxiety, and even anguish. On the other hand, when you start aligning with the right timing, something changes immediately. Clarity appears. The mind organizes itself. Peace returns. Because now you're no longer fighting the flow. You are walking within it. This does not mean that everything will be easy, but it does mean that there will be meaning. Each step begins to make more sense. Each decision fits better, and that feeling of confusion is replaced by direction. Maybe there's something in your life right now that you know you need to do, but you've been putting it off. Or maybe you're trying to speed up something that hasn't arrived at the right time yet, and this has generated an internal discomfort that you could not explain. But when this awareness is activated, everything begins to adjust. The mind awakens, the heart aligns, and life begins to flow more lightly, because now there is a clear understanding. There is a set time for all things, and peace is in living within that time. Ecclesiastes 3:1. Everything has its appointed time, and there is a time for every purpose under heaven. And when you begin to align with God's timing, something even more powerful happens. Your own life becomes living evidence of this transformation. Because there is nothing stronger than a mind that has been truly touched and that now carries peace in a visible, real, perceptible way. The Samaritan woman experienced just that. When she met Jesus, it wasn't just an ordinary conversation. It was an encounter that pierced every layer of his mind. Jesus revealed things that no one knew, touched areas that she hid, brought to light a truth that she herself avoided facing. And at that moment, something inside her was completely reconfigured. She didn't leave there with just information. She left transformed, and this is evident in what happens afterwards. She rushes back to the city, but not to repeat a religious speech, nor to convince anyone with arguments. She simply shares what she has experienced. "Come, see a man who has told me all that I have done." This is not just a sentence. It is the expression of a mind that has found something real. Because when one experiences the truth, one does not have to force anything. Life itself becomes a message. The way of speaking changes, the way of reacting changes, the way you see everything around you changes, and people begin to notice. This is what many are looking for without realizing it. Not just hearing about peace, but to live in a way that this peace is visible. And that happens when the mind is really transformed. When what once generated shame, fear, or confusion no longer has the same power. The Samaritan woman did not have her past erased at that moment, but the way she related to him changed completely. And that brought freedom. It brought lightness. It brought a security that no longer depended on the opinion of others. And this is an important point. A renewed mind is no longer trying to prove something to anyone. She lives from what she has already received. And this generates a peace that not only remains, but it also influences those around you. You may not have realized it yet, but what God is doing in your mind is not just for you. There is an impact that goes beyond. People will observe, they will feel, they will notice that something has changed. And often without words, your life will start to point a way, and this is how the transformation is strengthened. When you don't just understand, but it lives. When you don't just listen, but he carries this into his daily life. And if as you listen to this, there is something in your heart that needs prayer, don't keep it to yourself. Write in the comments what you want to put before God. It could be something personal, something for your family, or even someone you love. Because when people come together in faith, something powerful happens, and that connection can be the beginning of a response you've been waiting for. John 4:29. Come, behold a man who has told me all that I have done. Is not this the Christ? And as your life begins to become a living testimony, a turning point emerges that separates those who move forward from those who remain stuck in the same cycles. How you respond when God speaks. Because it's not just listening, it is to obey. And more than that, it is to obey without delay. Pedro lived a situation that reveals exactly this internal conflict. He had spent the whole night trying to fish. He was experienced. He knew what he was doing. He knew the process. And even so, it had no result. This wasn't just an external frustration. It was already beginning to affect his mind. Tiredness, the repetition of failure, the feeling of effort with no return. And then Jesus appears and gives a direction that humanly didn't make sense. He had the nets launched again. At that moment, Peter had two options: trust in past experience or obey the present word. And that's the same point that many people face today. The mind tends to cling to what has already happened. If something didn't work out before, it creates resistance. If there was frustration, she tries to avoid a new attempt. And without realizing it, he begins to limit his own possibilities based on the past. This generates internal blockages that prevent new results. But Peter answered in a different way. He said, "But because you command, I will cast the net." This phrase carries a powerful key. He did not ignore what he experienced, but decided not to be governed by it. He chose to obey above logic, above experience, above frustration. And at that moment, something broke. Immediate obedience broke the cycle. What seemed like a repetition of failure turned into a completely new result. This shows that often the problem is not in the situation. It is in the resistance of the mind to try again when God is directing. How many areas of your life can be blocked exactly by this? Not because you didn't try, but because he tried at the wrong time, or in the wrong way, or without the right direction. And now, when a new opportunity arises, the mind reacts with doubt, with fear, with blockage. But when you decide to obey, even without understanding everything, something begins to unlock internally. The mind opens, resistance decreases, and you start to experience paths that previously seemed closed. Obedience has that power. It doesn't just generate external results. It frees the mind from old patterns. It breaks repetitive cycles. It makes room for the new. And that doesn't require perfection. Requires willingness. Willingness to listen, to trust, and to act at the right time. Because often, the difference between staying in the same place and experiencing something new lies in a simple but immediate answer. And when that response happens, peace begins to flow in a different way. Not just as a feeling, but as the certainty that you are walking in line with what God is releasing for your life. Luke 5:5. But because you command, I will cast the net. And when that obedience begins to unlock pathways, there comes an even deeper level of transformation that is often overlooked, but that defines the clarity of your mind, the condition of your heart. Because it is not possible to keep thoughts aligned when the interior is divided. There is a direct link between what you carry inside and the way you see everything around you. Jesus was direct in saying that the pure in heart would see God. This is not just a distant spiritual promise. It's a revelation about perception. Seeing God is not limited to something physical, but to an ability to discern, to recognize, to perceive his presence and his action in all things. And this ability depends on something internal. A mind can be full of information, full of experiences, full of attempts. But if the heart is loaded with mixed intentions, inner conflicts, misaligned desires, that mind loses clarity. Thoughts get confused, decisions become heavy, and peace begins to recede. How many times have you felt this way without understanding exactly why? As if everything is kind of cloudy, as if there is a lack of direction, as if something is out of place inside you. Often this has nothing to do with lack of response. It has to do with a lack of inner alignment. Purity of heart does not mean perfection. It means sincerity before God. It means a heart that is not divided, that is not trying to follow two paths at once, that is not bound by hidden intentions. It is a heart that stands with truth, and when that alignment starts happening, the mind responds immediately. Thoughts become clearer, decisions become lighter. What used to generate doubt begins to make sense, and, little by little, a new way of seeing is established. It's like cleaning a lens that has been dirty for a long time. Reality has not changed, but the way of seeing it changed completely. And that brings peace, because now you're no longer struggling to make sense of everything. No, you're seeing clearly. Maybe there's something inside you that needs to be adjusted, not in what you do on the outside, but in what you carry inside. Intentions, feelings, silent conflicts. And this has influenced more than you think. But when you decide to align this before God, something begins to organize itself in a natural way. The mind calms down, the heart finds direction, and the presence of God becomes more perceptible, more real, more constant. If this word touched something deep within you, maybe it's because God is calling you to that alignment now. And if you felt it truly, write in the comments, God chose me. Sometimes, acknowledging this with a simple statement already initiates a powerful transformation within you. Matthew 5:8. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. And when the heart begins to be purified and the mind gains clarity, there is an essential step that underpins all of this: humility. Because it is no use seeing more clearly if the interior still resists positioning itself correctly before God. Humility is what reorganizes what is still misaligned inside. Nehemiah had an important position. He had influence. He had access. But when he learned of Jerusalem's condition, he did not react with pride, nor with self-sufficiency. He humbled himself. Before any external action, there was an internal movement. He wept, prayed, acknowledged his dependence on God. And this reveals something profound. Great reconstructions begin with surrendered hearts. The proud mind works silently but dangerously. It tries to control everything, insists on being right, resists acknowledging faults. And this generates constant conflict, because deep down she carries a weight that she cannot support. The need to maintain an image, to prove something, not to break. All this burdens the mind and drives away peace. Jesus taught the opposite. He showed that true strength is in humility, that surrendering is not losing, it's aligning yourself, because when you put yourself in the right place before God, something begins to automatically adjust within you. Humility doesn't diminish who you are. It positions you correctly. It takes the burden off trying to be all alone and puts you in a place where God can work more deeply. And when that happens, the mind finds rest. How many times the tiredness you feel does not come from circumstances, but the attempt to sustain something alone, to carry internal responsibilities that you don't have to carry, to resist something that deep down you know you need to deliver. Humility breaks this cycle. It makes room. It allows God to enter where there was once resistance. And in this movement, something begins to be restored. Thoughts are organized, emotions calm down. The mind stops fighting itself, and it's not complicated. Sometimes it starts with a simple internal attitude, a sincere recognition, a moment when you stop and admit that you need God more than you thought. And that doesn't weaken you, sets you free. Nehemiah didn't just rebuild walls. He began by rebuilding his inner self before God. And that made all the difference in what came after. Because when the inside is aligned, the outside starts to respond. Maybe there's something inside you that needs to be delivered, adjusted, repositioned. And this may be the time to take that step, not with its own strength, but with true humility. Maybe you've been waiting for an answer for a long time, and this message came to you for a reason. Stay until the end, because what is yet to be revealed can touch exactly the point you need to live this complete transformation. 2 Chronicles 7:14. And if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face. And when humility begins to reposition your interior, something even more powerful starts to happen in an almost invisible but profoundly transformative way. The way you see what you already have changes completely. Because the mind, when it is not aligned, tends to always focus on what is missing, on what has not worked, on what has not yet arrived. And this generates a silent cycle of dissatisfaction, anxiety, and constant weight. But Jesus, when faced with a hungry crowd and few resources, did something that totally breaks this logic. Before any miracle, before any multiplication, he gave thanks. And this detail reveals a spiritual code that many ignore. Gratitude comes before visible change. This sounds simple, but it transforms everything, because the ungrateful mind always sees scarcity. She looks at the little and concludes that it is not enough. It clings to what is missing and ignores what is already present. And the more this pattern repeats itself, the more the person feels limited, pressured, and restless. But when gratitude comes in, it rearranges the way of thinking. She changes the focus. It takes the mind off the lack and puts it into provision. And that doesn't mean denying reality. It means seeing beyond it. Jesus looked at the little and saw enough, and in thanking, he activated something that was already available, but had not yet been perceived in that way. This shows that gratitude is not just a reaction, it's a key. And when you start applying this in your life, something changes internally. Situations that once seemed heavy are beginning to be seen more lightly. Small details become valuable. The mind slows down because it is no longer stuck in a constant state of dissatisfaction. Gratitude creates space for peace, and this happens because it breaks one of the most exhausting cycles of the mind, that of always waiting for something external to then feel good. When you learn to be thankful in the now, regardless of the circumstances, you begin to access a peace that does not depend on immediate changes. That doesn't mean you stop wanting improvements, but it does mean that you no longer live hostage to what has not yet happened. You begin to live with more presence, more awareness, more lightness. And the more this practice is strengthened, the more the mind is reprogrammed. Negative thoughts lose strength. The comparison decreases. Anxiety gives way to a more stable confidence. Maybe today you are looking at your life and seeing only what is missing. But there is something there now that is already a reason for gratitude. And when you decide to recognize this, something begins to change, even if silently. If this message has reached you, don't ignore it. God speaks in simple but profound ways. And if you want to continue receiving this type of word that strengthens and transforms, take advantage of this moment to subscribe to the channel, activate notifications, and leave your like. That way, you don't miss any direction that you can keep aligning your mind with that peace. 1 Thessalonians 5:18, in everything give thanks, because this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. And after learning to cultivate gratitude, there is an essential point that defines whether this peace will remain or be lost over time: spiritual vigilance. Because the peace that Jesus teaches is not something that is automatically maintained. It needs to be guarded, protected, preserved. And this requires awareness. In Gethsemane, moments before one of the most intense periods of his life, Jesus warned his disciples directly, "Watch and pray." He didn't say this by chance. He knew that there was a level of spiritual pressure coming, and that an unprepared mind could not sustain what was to come. But the disciples did not understand at that moment. They slept. And this detail reveals something profound. The lack of vigilance does not seem dangerous at first, but it makes room for falls that could be avoided. The mind works in the same way. When you're not mindful, when you don't notice what's coming in, what's occupying your thoughts, what's influencing your emotions, you start to become vulnerable. Small distractions gain space, negative thoughts set in, and, little by little, what was aligned begins to become disorganized. Jesus was not just talking about watching the external environment, but to maintain an active internal consciousness. It is to be mindful of what you allow to remain within you. It's noticing when something starts to take away your peace before it grows, because the fall does not happen all at once. It starts with small concessions, small distractions, small failures of attention. And when you realize it, you're already involved in a state that you didn't want to be in. But when mindfulness becomes a part of your life, something changes completely. You start to identify faster what is not good for you. You don't get carried away easily by any thought. There is an active filter, a consciousness that protects your mind, and that doesn't generate weight, it generates security. Because now you are no longer living on automatic. You are aware, aligned, and this allows peace to remain, even in environments or situations that would have previously affected you. Vigilance is also linked to prayer, not as a mechanical habit, but as a constant connection. It is this contact that keeps your mind strengthened, prepared, steady. Without this, even those who have experienced profound moments can weaken. Maybe you've noticed this at some point in your life. When I was more connected, more attentive, everything seemed clearer, lighter. But when that vigilance waned, the mind began to get lost in small things. And this shows that peace does not depend only on what you have received, but how much you are willing to save. And when you start living like this, with that awareness active, your mind becomes more stable, more protected, less vulnerable. Not because there are no challenges, but because you are prepared to face them differently. Matthew 26:41, "Watch and pray, lest you enter into temptation." And when that vigilance begins to protect your mind, there comes an indispensable tool to keep that protection steadfast, God's Word. Because it is not enough just to notice when a wrong thought arrives. You need to know how to respond to it, and that is exactly what Jesus demonstrated in the wilderness. Every temptation that arose came not only as an external action, but as an internal suggestion, an attempt to distort the truth. And Jesus didn't argue. He didn't argue based on emotions. He didn't try to resist with his own strength. He responded with something much more solid, the Word. This reveals a powerful principle. The mind is only stable when it is grounded in truth. Destructive thoughts will always arise. Ideas that generate fear, doubt, discouragement, insecurity. This is part of the internal battle, but what defines the result is not the arrival of these thoughts. It's how you respond to them. When there is no basis, the mind is lost. He begins to consider everything, to believe any suggestion, to let himself be carried away by what seems strongest at the moment. And this generates instability, because there is no fixed point. But when the Word is internalized, something changes completely. Not only do you hear, you carry it within you, and at the right moment this truth arises. It confronts wrong thinking, it interrupts the negative cycle, it brings clarity. It is as if the mind has a shield, and this shield is not built all at once. It is formed gradually through repetition, meditation, practice. Every time you expose yourself to the Word, every time you reflect, every time you keep it within you, you are strengthening your inner structure. The psalmist understood this when he said that he hid the Word in his heart. It wasn't just decorating. It was to internalize to the point of becoming part of who he was. And this brings security, because when difficult times come, you don't have to look for answers on the outside. They are already inside you. and that changes how you react. Anxiety decreases, doubt loses strength, fear does not dominate as before. Perhaps today your mind is being attacked by thoughts that seem difficult to control, ideas that are repeated, that tire, that confuse. But there is an answer to that, not based on effort, but in truth. And the more you delve into it, the more you notice that your mind starts to stabilize, not because the thoughts have disappeared, but because now there is something stronger within you. And this generates peace. A peace that does not depend on external silence, but on a firm internal structure built on that which does not change. Few people really understand the power of this, but if you've made it this far, maybe it's because God is trying to take you to a deeper level. Stick around until the end, because what's yet to come can cement all of this within you in a way you've never experienced. Psalm 119:11. I have hidden your word in my heart, that I might not sin against you. And when the word begins to become that shield within you, something even deeper begins to happen. It's not just what you know about God, it is how close you get to Him. Because there is a huge difference between knowing about God and living in intimacy with Him. And it is this intimacy that completely redefines the mind. João understood this in a unique way. Among all the disciples, he had a different closeness to Jesus. He was closer, he watched more closely, he listened more attentively, and this was not just a physical issue, it was an inner connection. This proximity has shaped his way of seeing everything. While others still struggled to understand, John perceived more clearly. While many reacted with fear or doubt, he demonstrated a different security. This shows that intimacy with God not only strengthens faith, it changes the way the mind works. Because the farther away you are, the harder it is to notice. It is easier to get confused, to get lost in thoughts, to get carried away by emotions. But when there is proximity, something changes. God's voice becomes more recognizable, the presence becomes more constant, and the mind begins to align naturally. Intimacy is not built in isolated moments. It is developed on a daily basis, small moments of connection, of searching, of silence, of attention, not as an obligation, but as a desire. And, little by little, this creates a real relationship, and this relationship transforms everything. Because now you're not just trying to apply principles, you're living with someone. You are walking with God, perceiving His direction, feeling His presence. And this brings a stability that does not depend on circumstances. The mind begins to slow down because it no longer has to look everywhere for answers. There is a constant source. There is a place where you can come back again and again, and that brings peace. Many people live trying to find balance only with their own effort, trying to control thoughts, trying to stay calm. But without intimacy, it becomes heavy. Because the base that sustains everything is missing. But when you draw near to God, as the word itself says, He also draws near to you. And this approach changes the internal environment. Thoughts begin to align without extreme effort. Emotions stabilize. The mind finds rest. Maybe what you need most now is not more answers, but closer. It's not more information, but more connection. Because it is in this place that the transformation happens in a deeper way. And the more you allow yourself to live this, the more you realize that your mind is no longer the same. It does not react as before. It does not get lost as before. It does not agitate in the same way. Because now there is a constant presence shaping everything from within. James 4:8, draw near to God, and He will draw near to you. And the more this intimacy with God deepens, the more a truth begins to become evident within you. You are not called to live dominated by fear, because there is a spiritual authority available. But it is only accessed when the mind understands who you are and in whom you are grounded. When Jesus was in the boat with the disciples, the storm was not small. The wind was strong, The waves were rough, and everything indicated real danger. The disciples, even though they were with him, were seized with fear. Their minds interpreted that situation as something out of control. And at that moment, fear spoke louder than faith. But Jesus stood up, and what he did was not only calm the environment, he revealed a position. He rebuked the wind, spoke to the sea, and all was still. This shows that spiritual authority does not ignore chaos. She stands before him, and this is a crucial point, because many times fear does not come only from what is happening, but from the way you put yourself in front of what is happening. When the mind does not recognize its position in God, it shrinks, submits, allows itself to be dominated. But when this awareness awakens, something changes completely. Spiritual authority is not to shout louder, nor to pretend that everything is fine. It is knowing deep within you that you are not alone and that there is a greater power sustaining you. It is to take a firm position, even when circumstances try to pressure you. How many times has your mind been taken over by fearful thoughts, scenarios that haven't even happened yet, concerns that have grown beyond what is necessary, sensations that seemed impossible to control, and at that moment it seemed that there was no way out. But when you understand that authority, you start reacting differently, not because fear never appears again, but because he no longer has the same power. You don't accept any thought. You do not submit to any sensation. There is an answer within you, and that answer comes from aligning with God. Jesus didn't calm the storm just to resolve that moment. He was teaching something much bigger, that peace does not depend on the absence of wind, but of the authority you exercise in the midst of it. And when that truth settles within you, the mind begins to strengthen. What once shook you loses strength. Situations that seemed bigger than you start to be seen in a different way, and little by little, a new posture is formed. Maybe today there is some storm in your life, something that has stirred his mind, taken away his peace, generated worry. But there is a position you can take in the face of this, not out of despair, but of authority. And if that word is bringing clarity to you, don't let it slide. Sometimes stating a truth further strengthens what is being built within you. Write in the comments, "I trust in God's action." Make it a living affirmation, a positioning that starts in your mind and is reflected throughout your life. Mark 4:39. And he awoke and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Be still, be still." And the wind was still, and there was a great calm. And when that authority begins to take hold within you, an even deeper level emerges that defines whether that steadfastness will remain or be shaken by circumstances: perseverance. Because it's easy to stand your ground when everything is fine, but the true transformation of the mind happens when everything seems to fall apart, and yet you decide not to disconnect from God. Job lived exactly this scenario. In a short period of time, he lost possessions, lost children, lost stability, lost everything that humanly sustained his life. And as if that were not enough, she still faced internal questions, deep emotional pain, and a silence that seemed to have no answer. Any mind faced with something like this could collapse. But Job did something that reveals a powerful key. He didn't deny the pain. He didn't pretend that everything was fine. He didn't ignore the suffering. He felt, questioned, went through intense moments, but he did not detach himself from God. And this decision changes everything, because perseverance is not the absence of pain, it is permanence in the midst of it. Jesus taught just that. He never promised a life without hardship, but he showed that true peace does not depend on the absence of suffering. It is born when, even in the midst of pain, you remain connected, firm, aligned. And this takes root, deep spiritual roots that sustain the mind, even when everything around is unstable. It is like a tree that faces strong winds, but does not fall because it is well established. The strength is not in what appears on the outside, it is in what was built inside. How many times have you faced situations that seemed too big? Moments when the desire was to give up, move away, stop everything, and in those moments the mind begins to question, to get confused, to try to find a quick way out to relieve the pain. But perseverance takes you somewhere else. It keeps you steady when it would be easier to retreat. It sustains you when there are no immediate answers, and over time it begins to produce something inside you that no circumstance can destroy. Real stability. Because now your peace is not based on what you have, what is happening, or what you can lose. It is based on your connection with God, and this cannot be shaken in the same way. Job stated something that reveals this depth. The Lord gave him, and the Lord took him. Blessed be the name of the Lord. This is not indifference. It is positioning. It is a mind that, even wounded, chooses to remain. And this choice transforms everything. Maybe you're going through a tough time right now. Something that has stirred your mind, that has tested your faith, that has challenged your peace. And the will to retreat may even exist. But it is at this point that perseverance becomes decisive, not as an empty effort, but as a decision to stay connected, even without understanding everything. Because it is in this kind of permanence that the mind is truly strengthened. It is there that peace ceases to be fragile and becomes firm. It is there that you discover that you can go through any situation without losing who you have become. Job 1:21. The Lord gave him, and the Lord took him. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And when perseverance begins to take those deep roots, something unexpected can come along the way, a joy that doesn't depend on circumstances. It is not a superficial joy linked to what is happening outside. It is something that is born within and remains, even when everything around it seems otherwise. Paul and Silas lived this in an impressive way. They were not in a favorable environment. They were trapped, bruised, physically limited, with no apparent sign of immediate change. Everything around indicated pain, injustice, and difficulty. Anyone in that scenario could easily give in to discouragement, revolt, or silence, but what they did was completely different. Instead of letting themselves be dominated by their surroundings, they began to pray and singing. This makes no sense to natural logic. How can someone sing at a time like this? How can one access joy in the midst of pain? The answer lies in something that Jesus also carried, a joy that did not come from circumstances, but from an inner conviction, a connection so deep with God that nothing external was able to erase. And this reveals a powerful secret about the mind. When joy depends on what happens outside, it is unstable. Any change, any difficulty, any frustration is enough to shake it. But when that joy is born of connection with God, it becomes steadfast. She doesn't ignore the pain, but he does not surrender to it either. Paul and Silas were not denying what they were experiencing. They were choosing something bigger than that, and at that moment, something began to change, not only within them, but around as well. Because spiritual joy has that power. It reorganizes emotions, strengthens the interior, and creates a different environment, even in the midst of chaos. It changes how you feel, how you think, how you react. And this is not something reserved for the few. It is an access available to those who decide not to stick only to what they see, but to connect with what is eternal. Maybe you're at a time when everything feels heavy, where joy seems distant, where emotional fatigue speaks louder, and humanly, this makes sense. But there is a dimension that goes beyond that, a joy that does not depend on the immediate solution, but on constant presence, a joy that starts small, almost imperceptible, but that grows as you connect more deeply with God. And when that joy begins to be activated, something changes in your mind. The weight decreases, the perspective broadens, and what once seemed unbearable is beginning to be faced with a different force. The mind that accesses this joy becomes more stable, firmer, less vulnerable to external oscillations. Not because everything has changed, but because something inside you has changed, and that change makes all the difference in the path you continue to take. Acts 16:25. And about midnight, Paul and Silas prayed and sang hymns to God, and the rest of the prisoners listened to them. And when that joy begins to stabilize your emotions, an even deeper need arises to sustain that transformation: wisdom. Because it is not enough to feel peace in some moments. It is necessary to make decisions that preserve this peace along the way. And it is exactly here that many get lost, not for lack of faith, but for lack of clear direction in the way of thinking. Solomon understood this in a unique way. Faced with the opportunity to ask for anything, he did not ask for riches, nor power, nor success. He asked for wisdom. And this choice reveals something powerful. A mind guided by wisdom can deal with any situation, while a mind guided only by emotions becomes unstable. Divine wisdom organizes thoughts. It puts everything in its place. It prevents hasty decisions. It brings balance between reason and faith. And above all, it prevents you from being governed by momentary impulses that often lead to regret. Jesus taught with that kind of wisdom. His words were not only beautiful or profound, they penetrated the heart because they brought clarity. He responded to complex situations with simplicity, resolved conflicts with precision, and never reacted in a disorderly manner. And this shows that peace is not only in what you feel, it's in the choices you make. How many times have decisions been made on impulse, in the heat of emotion, in the pressure of the moment, in the anxiety of solving something quickly? And then came the weight, the doubt, the feeling that it could have been different. The unwise mind lives in this cycle. She reacts, regrets, tries to correct, and wears out. But when wisdom begins to guide your thoughts, something changes completely. There is a pause before the decision. There is a filter before the reaction. There is a clarity that avoids many internal conflicts. And the most powerful thing is that this wisdom does not need to be conquered with human effort. It can be requested. The word itself says that God gives liberally to those who ask. This means that you don't have to keep making decisions in the dark. You can start to pursue this direction intentionally. And when this becomes a habit, your mind starts to work differently, less impulsive, more balanced, less confusing, clearer, less burdened, lighter. Because now there is a drive. Maybe today you are faced with decisions, doubts, or paths that seem uncertain. And this has generated internal wear and tear. But there is an answer to that, not just based on what you think or feel, but into something higher, firmer, safer. And when you start living guided by this wisdom, peace is no longer something unstable and becomes a natural consequence of your choices. In the next few moments, something even deeper will be revealed, something that may touch areas that you didn't even realize needed transformation. Stay tuned, because this may be just the signal you needed to take the next step safely. James 1:5. And if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally. And after all this, there is an inevitable point that everyone faces at some point along the way: burnout, not only physical, but mental and emotional. It's when you've tried to keep the faith, you've tried to do the right thing, you've faced challenges, and yet you feel that something inside you is tired. The mind, when it tries to carry everything on its own, reaches this limit. Isaiah revealed a promise that goes beyond the natural. He spoke about those who wait on the Lord. And this word wait does not only mean to wait, but to trust, to remain, to depend. And it is in this place that something supernatural happens. The forces are renewed. Jesus lived exactly that. Even after intense moments, after teaching multitudes, healing people, dealing with constant pressures, He withdrew, not out of weakness, but out of wisdom. He knew he needed to reconnect. He needed to be strengthened again. And this reveals something essential. No one can sustain a mind at peace, trying to carry everything with their own strength. Maybe you felt it, that feeling of tiredness that doesn't just go away with physical rest. Heavy thoughts, worn-out emotions, a mind that always seems on edge. And the more you try to solve everything yourself, the more this weight increases. But there is a different way. When you learn to depend on Spirit, something changes in a profound way. You no longer have to sustain everything yourself. There is a force that comes from outside, but that acts within you. A renewal that does not depend on circumstances, but on connection. And this renewal doesn't happen just once. It is continuous. It is like a fountain that is constantly renewing itself. Every time you turn to God, every time you choose to trust, every time you slow down and connect, something begins to be restored. The mind calms down, the weight decreases, the force returns. And that's not just emotional, it is spiritual. Isaiah describes it powerfully, to go up like eagles. This isn't just about strength. It's about perspective. The eagle doesn't fight the storm. She uses the force of the wind to rise above her, and that represents exactly what happens when your strength comes from God. You stop being overwhelmed by circumstances and begins to position himself above them. Maybe today you are tired, not just physically, but inside, and this has affected his mind, his peace, his way of seeing everything. But that promise lives on. A renewal is available, not based on how much you can take, but how much you are willing to depend on. And when you access that, something starts to change. The mind is strengthened again, spirits return, and what seemed too heavy begins to be supported in a different way. Isaiah 40:31. But those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They will mount up with wings like eagles. And after experiencing this renewal of strength, there is a final, deep and decisive point in this journey of the mind: surrender. Because so far, you have learned to discern, to trust, to persevere, to strengthen yourself, but there may still be an area where you keep trying to control. And it is precisely this control that often prevents complete peace. Jesus in Gethsemane revealed something that few can understand in depth. He did not deny the pain. He didn't pretend everything was fine. On the contrary, he expressed exactly what he was feeling. "Father, if you are willing, let this cup pass from me." This shows that acknowledging what one feels is not a lack of faith, but what comes after is what transforms everything. "Nevertheless, not my will, but yours, be done." This phrase carries a power that completely reconfigures the mind, because it represents the moment when the internal struggle ends, the moment when the need to control, to understand everything, to define the path, is replaced by a total surrender. And this is where many resist, because the human mind wants guarantees. He wants to know how it will happen, when it will happen, why it is happening. And when he doesn't find those answers, he tries to take control. But this control generates weight, it generates tension, it generates anxiety. Surrender, on the other hand, does the opposite. It doesn't mean giving up, it means to trust completely. It means letting go of what you can't control and resting in what God is already leading. And when that happens, something immediately changes within you. The weight decreases, the mind slows down, the internal tension disappears. Because now, you're no longer fighting the process, you're flowing with it. Jesus did not find peace in Gethsemane because the situation changed. He found peace because he surrendered. And this is a profound key. The peace that exceeds understanding does not come when everything makes sense. It comes when you decide to trust, even without understanding. How many times has your mind been stuck trying to solve everything? Thinking about all the possibilities, trying to predict every detail, looking for answers that don't arrive. This is tiring. This wears you out. This steals peace. But there is a point where you can stop this fight, a point where you recognize that you don't need to have all the answers, that you don't have to carry everything yourself, that there is a greater purpose being driven, even when you don't see it. And when you get to that point, something opens up inside you, a deep rest. Not superficial, not momentary, but real. A kind of peace that does not depend on circumstances, because it is rooted in trust. Maybe there's something today that you're still trying to control, something that has occupied his mind, taken away his peace, generated restlessness. And deep down, you know you need to deliver. And when this surrender happens, the mind finally finds the place where it should always be, at rest. Luke 22:42. Father, if you are willing, let this cup pass from me, yet not my will, but yours, be done. And when this surrender really happens, something even deeper begins to manifest, inner transformation. Because so far, a lot has been adjusted, aligned, restored. But there is a level where change stops being just internal and begins to become visible in who you become. Zacchaeus lived exactly that. He wasn't just someone with a comfortable financial position. He carried a mentality built over time, marked by choices, habits, and behaviors that were already ingrained. His way of thinking was already shaped by everything he experienced. But then a meeting took place. And this meeting was not common. It wasn't just a conversation, nor just an emotional moment. It was something that directly touched the structure of his mind. Jesus did not have to confront him with accusations or impose changes. The presence was enough, and what happened next reveals the power of this kind of transformation. Zacchaeus began to act completely differently. He decided to return, correct, restore. This was not an obligation. It was a natural response from a mind that was reconfigured. Because when change is real, it doesn't have to be forced. And this reveals an essential truth. True peace doesn't just come from feeling something different for a moment. It comes from becoming someone different. Many people seek sensations, moments, experiences, but they are still stuck in the same patterns, in the same attitudes, in the same thoughts. And this generates a cycle where peace comes and goes without remaining. But when the encounter with Christ is genuine, something changes at the root. The way of thinking changes. The way of acting changes. The way of seeing everything changes. And, little by little, a new identity begins to form. And this identity no longer depends on the past, nor on failures, nor on ancient stories. It is built from what God is doing now. This is what brings stability, because now you're not just trying to live differently, you have become someone different. And this eliminates internal conflicts, because there is coherence between what you think, feel, and do. Maybe you've had moments with God, experiences that touched your heart, but He still feels that something needs to change in a deeper way. And this happens when the meeting is no longer just a moment, and it becomes a continuous transformation. Zacchaeus did not return to who he was before. That meeting marked a new beginning, and that's exactly what Jesus does. He doesn't just improve something in you. It creates something new. And when this new reality begins to take hold, the mind finds a different peace, not based on constant effort, but on a new way of existing. And perhaps, as you listen to this, something within you is being awakened to this kind of change. Not superficial, not momentary, but real. Stay until the end, because what comes next can consolidate all of this within you in an even deeper way. There is something being prepared that can definitely mark this transformation in your life. Luke 19:8. Behold, I give to the poor half of my possessions, and if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I restore it fourfold. And when this inner transformation begins to take hold, one last silent barrier needs to be overcome for peace to be complete: the fear of the future. Because even with a renewed mind, with new attitudes and a new identity, there can still be that restlessness about what is to come. That question that arises in silence. And tomorrow? Jesus never ignored this human concern, but he always pointed to something greater. He directed the mind beyond the present time, to an eternal reality that completely changes the way we see everything. Revelation reveals this truth clearly and powerfully. A future where there is no pain, where suffering has no space, where tears no longer make sense. This is not just a distant promise, it is a key to the now, because when you live trapped in fear of the future, your mind never rests in the present. She is always projecting scenarios, anticipating problems, trying to control what hasn't even happened yet. And this generates anxiety, exhaustion, and constant insecurity. But when the eternal perspective becomes real within you, something changes completely. The future is no longer a threat, and it becomes a promise. This doesn't mean that you ignore life's challenges, but it does mean that they no longer have the power to dominate you. Because there is a greater certainty sustaining your mind. A conviction that regardless of what happens here, there is a final destination where everything will be restored. And this certainty brings peace, a peace that does not depend on human guarantees, nor on predictions, nor on control. A peace that is born of trust in something that has already been established by God. Jesus lived with this awareness. He knew what was coming. He knew the suffering he would face, but that didn't paralyze him. On the contrary, it gave him a strength and tranquility that went beyond the present moment. And that's exactly what happens when you start living with that vision. The mind frees itself from the weight of the what if, anxiety decreases, fear loses ground, because now you're no longer trying to hold the future into your own hands. You are trusting in the one who is already there. Perhaps what has stolen your peace the most is not what is happening now, but what do you imagine can happen next? Thoughts that haven't even come true yet, but that are already taking up space within you. But this word comes to adjust that. There is a promise that goes beyond all this, a future that cannot be shaken. And when you start living with this certainty, the present becomes lighter, calmer, safer. And if this message found you at exactly this point, maybe it's because God is wanting to align your mind with that truth right now. Nothing happens without a purpose. If you feel like this has come at the right time, write in the comments, "I believe, Lord." This simple statement can be the beginning of a new way of living, where the fear of the future no longer has space. Revelation 21:4. And God will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and there shall be no more death, nor mourning, nor outcry, nor pain. Everything that has been revealed so far points to a simple but profound truth. It is not enough to understand. You have to surrender. Because when the mind finally recognizes that it cannot control tomorrow, it opens up to trust the one who is already in the future and sustains all things. It is at this point that knowledge ceases to be theory and becomes living experience. God's promise is not far away. It is accessible now. As it is written in Jeremiah 33:3, "Call unto me, and I will answer thee, and show unto thee great and mighty things which thou knowest not." This means that there is an answer, a direction, and a peace available, but that they are only accessed when there is a sincere movement of approximation. This is the time to leave only reflection and enter practice. Everything that was touched, everything that moved his heart, everything that brought clarity to his mind, now it must be placed before God. So open your heart where you are, not with perfect words, but with sincerity. Let's pray together, trusting that he is listening, that he is present, and that he is already at work even before you know it. Beloved Father, your word declares that your peace passeth all understanding, and it is in this promise that we place ourselves now. opening our hearts before your presence, recognizing that you alone can touch the depths of the mind and restore that which no one else can reach. Lord, we thank you for every truth revealed so far, for every teaching that has illuminated paths, for every word that has brought direction, consolation, and awakening. Thank you that even in the midst of our internal struggles, you never abandon us. Thank you that your presence accompanies us, sustains us, and calls us to a place of peace that the world cannot offer. At this moment, Father, we cry out for strength, for wisdom, and for a heart sensitive to your voice. Teach us to apply all that we have learned, to live in alignment with your will, to discern the thoughts that come from you, and to reject all that tries to lead us away from your truth. It strengthens our minds, sustains our spirits, and leads us along paths of peace. Lord, look now at every person who is praying at this time, those who are tired, burdened, with agitated minds and afflicted hearts. It brings rest. Those who face sickness, touch with your healing. Those who go through financial difficulties, open doors and bring provision. Those who live family conflicts, pour out reconciliation and restoration. And for those who are struggling in silence, facing inner battles that no one sees, manifest your presence in a real and transformative way. In this instant, in silence, each heart presents itself before you. Every request, every pain, every need is placed in your hands. Father, we surrender everything to you, our fears, our uncertainties, our deepest thoughts, and even what we can't express in words. We trust that your plan is perfect, that your timing is right, and that your will is always good, pleasing, and perfect. It takes control of our mind and heart. May all anxiety be dispelled now. May all confusion be replaced by clarity. May every restlessness give way to your peace. Reconfigure our mind, Lord, and make it a place where your presence dwells constantly. And may your word be fulfilled in us. May the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, guard our hearts and our thoughts in Christ Jesus. We receive that peace now, by faith, and rest in you. We pray confidently, surrendered, in the name of Jesus. Amen. Throughout this journey, something profound has been revealed. The peace that Jesus teaches is not superficial, it is not fleeting, and it does not depend on what happens around you. It is born within you when your mind is reconfigured by God's truth. Every teaching, every example, every principle has shown that there is a real way out of anxiety, fear, and confusion, and into a place of rest, clarity, and trust. This message did not reach you by chance. God chose you to hear that today. Maybe it's because He knows exactly what you've been facing in silence, the thoughts that disturb you, the struggles that no one sees. And now that you've heard all of this, the question that remains is, what are you going to do with this truth? Will you continue to live in the same way, or will you allow Jesus to completely transform your mind and your way of looking at life? I am really happy to know that we are together so far. There's something special going on in that connection, and you're a part of it. If this message spoke to you, don't let it go unnoticed. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell to continue receiving content like this. But more than that, I want to meet you. Comment below where you are watching, and if you feel in your heart, share a little of what you are experiencing. Its history is important, and this space is also a place of faith, where we can unite in prayer and support, and it doesn't stop here. What you saw today is just a part of something much bigger. In the next video, we will delve even deeper into this path of transformation, revealing how to live daily in the presence of God and maintain this peace constantly, even in the midst of challenges. There is a next step waiting for you, and it can open up your spiritual vision even more. Allow God to continue speaking to your heart. Take the next step on this journey by watching the next video that will appear here on the screen. In it, we will continue to learn how to live in God's presence and experience the fullness of His plans. Don't stop here, because God still has much more to speak to you. Always remember, God is greater than any attack. Trust Him, and He will do infinitely more than you can imagine. May God bless your life, and I'll wait for you in the next video.